Hi Year 11 and welcome to English in 10. This video here is going to be talking about Christmas Carol and how does Dickens present ideas about responsibility within this text. I'm going to be focusing particularly on the character Fezziwig, but also look at the text as a whole. So first up, I want to think about stave 2 when we meet the foil to Scrooge as in terms of an employer, and that of course is Mr. Fezziwig. We see in this scene him as an employer, how he treats Scrooge, and Scrooge's very positive reaction to him on seeing him once again as an old man. He talks about the party that Fezziwig throws, and he uses this phrase, as if it cost a fortune, referring to the party that he put together, the excitement, the pleasure had by all, and the fact that it was as if it had cost a fortune, but actually probably Fezziwig very much spent very little on this. And this line initially shows the fact that Fezziwig, as an employer, as a man of business, as a man who had quite a lot of status in society at this point here, he's a very positive role model. He also has assumed a moral and social responsibility to those who are socially beneath him in terms of financial status, and the way in which he treats his employees, his two apprentices. This also highlights the fact that responsibility can't always be measured. It's not necessarily just about the money you give to charity, it's about how you behave. So think later on in the text, we see Scrooge giving money to the charity workers, but it's not simply that he does. He actually is a different man. He behaves differently. He doesn't just sort of do his donation once a year to Christmas charities. He actually acts like a better person. I'd like to contrast this quotation with something that Scrooge himself says in stave number 1, when he's talking to his nephew Fred, and he's criticising Fred's attitudes to wanting to spend money at Christmas and enjoy it. And he says, you're a year older and not an hour richer. So think about Fezziwig and Scrooge's both feelings and feelings towards money. And you can see here, this is Scrooge's attitude towards the what makes life good, and that of course is having more money, and also his own lack of social responsibility. He can't see the fact that actually you may wish to spend money on other people. You may want to spend money purely for the fun of having a good time with people. He can't see that actually money can be anything but giving you status or perhaps power within society. So think about the difference between these two characters here and how they perhaps have a social responsibility. You may also want to think about the fact that in stave number 4, when we see the businessmen discussing Scrooge after his death, how none of them have a good opinion of him, how none of them see him as being anything but sort of the old scratch, as they called him, because they don't see him as having any kind of role in society that's being positive at all. Okay, the next one here to look at here is the Ghost of Christmas Present. So the quote I'm using, you will recognise is actually an echo of a quote. So him repeating back Scrooge's lines of surplus population. This is an echo of Scrooge's lines back in stave 1 when he's talking about the poor and how they can't just go to prison or go to the workhouse, or in fact, if they're surplus population, they should just be dead. Think also about Thomas Malthus's theory. If you're not sure anything about the theory, please do add this to your revision list. In terms of thinking about what Dickens is saying here about population and resources that are had at that time point. This also highlights that at the end of the meeting between the Ghost of Christmas Present and Scrooge still needs guidance. Although he acts as if he's a changed man, he still needs more information, more guidance, more sort of viewing of people around him. So that's why the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come is still very crucial, because Scrooge is getting there, but he still needs a bit more development in terms of how he can be a much more responsible man to those around him. Also thinking there at the end of stave number 3, when we see ignorance and want, these two characters. Now think also about Dickens himself as a writer. What is his role here? What's his message in the story? Remember, this is a didactic book, and you've got to recall that in terms of what is it that Dickens is trying to put towards his characters and his audience at the time. Now Dickens is very concerned with poverty. We know this. He's very much he was a very sort of self-interested man in terms of how could he help the poor around him. And he's used Scrooge as the very worst example of man at this point. He's a rich Victorian man who had absolutely no responsibility towards anyone around him. And we see these two children that represent the next generation, how if we don't intercede now, of course, the next generation can be just the same as the current generation. And we're going to sort of see this real horrible vicious circle. But here, thinking about the point there is actually who can solve the problem. It's all good going to church, it's all good praying and being a good Christian person, and a lot of the rich at Victorian England would have been. But actually, the people who can really affect change is not necessarily the church, it is, of course, man. We are able to help the poor, change laws, affect social change better than the church itself could. So although Dickens, as you know, is a very religious person and was, very faithful in terms of his own religious beliefs, he recognised that actually if he wanted change to happen, it had to be through man doing it. So perhaps think about the overall message of responsibility at this point. Okay, so the next 40 minutes now is over to you. So how does Dickens present ideas about responsibility? So spend 40 minutes now writing your own response to this. So think about the social context of the point there. Think about Victorian England. Think about embedding quotations and perhaps use more than one quotation per paragraph that you write. Can you make links across the text? So don't just stick with one stay. Think about, can you show echoes or reflections or mirrors or perhaps real kind of contrasts across the text as well. And finally, don't forget to be detailed with your explanation. What actually is he saying about responsibility, and importantly, why. Okay, very best of luck. Over to you.